Welcome to the 2014 Battlefield Tour of each soldier in the Somme. This little montage has been put together for those that are less familiar with the background of World War I and have an interest in understanding what led to the war, how it came about, and what the main protagonists were up to. On the 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austro-Hungarian Empire, was assassinated in Sarajevo. Bosnia was at the time occupied by the Austrians in an attempt to put down a rising tide of ethnic nationalism. His assassins were Serbs. Austria seized upon the opportunity and accused the Kingdom of Serbia of harbouring the killers. Austria demanded a ban on anti-Austrian propaganda prevalent in Serbia and that the killers be found and arrested. Although Serbia agreed to the demands, the Serbian state refused to have the investigation overseen by officers from Austria. In response, the Austrians declared war on Serbia. The other nations of Europe fell into one camp or the other, mainly influenced by history. Russia backed the Serbs, while Germany sided with its close neighbour and ally Austria. The French saw the impending war as a chance to regain the lost region of Alsace-Lorraine. The British called upon the French and the Germans to observe the Belgian neutrality agreed in the Treaty of London from 1839 and signed by both nations. The French agreed, but Germany failed to respond, and King Albert of Belgium then strengthened the Belgian army to around 350,000 men. On the 31st of July 1914, Russia ordered a general mobilisation. Immediately, the Austrians followed suit. On the 2nd of August, Germany invaded Luxembourg and made sorties into France. Belgium attempted to remain neutral and refused Germany free passage across Belgium to offset the chance of a French attack against Germany. On the 3rd of August, Germany declared war on France, and the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, told Parliament that we cannot issue a declaration of unconditional neutrality. On the 4th of August, Germany invaded Belgium. The British issued Germany with an ultimatum: withdraw troops from Belgium or face war with Britain. Germany did not withdraw, and Britain was at war with Germany. 2 weeks later, German troops faced the British Expeditionary Force for the first time at Mons in Belgium, slowing what had been a rapid German advance across Europe. But not until Paris was in sight did the fortunes of the Allied forces change. The French, British and Belgian troops managed to stop the German advance. The Allies began to push the German forces back to the north, and the race for the sea began, with both sides aware of the crucial strategic significance of the Channel ports. Loss of the ports would have cut the British supply line, leaving troops isolated, exposed and ill-equipped. The German line reformed at Passchendaele, overlooking the town of Ypres, or Wipers as it was known to the British troops. As they made their way from Ypres, headed for Bruges, the First Battle of Ypres commenced. 12 weeks into the war, both sides were dug in, with fierce and bloody battles to follow. The British held one remaining area of Belgium not invaded by the Germans, the area known as Ypres Salient. Almost all of the British divisions would come to know the pockmarked quagmire. Many thousands of troops from every nation would never leave Ypres Salient. The Second Battle of Ypres, on the 22nd of April 1915 to the 25th of May 1915, saw the Germans release poison gas for the first time against the Allied troops in an area of Langermach and Bullkapelle. Had the Germans pressed home the gains, then Ypres probably would have fallen. However, the initial objective, Pilkem Ridge, was achieved. Only when daylight came was the devastating effect of the gas apparent. The German commanders realised that they could have opened the door to Ypres and the Channel ports beyond. Fortune once again had played a part. The gas attack had been scheduled for 0500 hours, but unfavourable winds delayed the attack until the afternoon of the 22nd of April. The late start denied the Germans the opportunity to complete a full assessment until the morning of the 23rd of April. by which time the Allied forces took the opportunity to regroup and establish an effective defensive line. The Third Battle of Ypres took place between the 7th of June and the 10th of November 1917. By this time the French army was falling into disarray. Mutiny began to break out, and General Nivelle, the hero of Verdun, was replaced after predicting he would drive the Germans from French soil at the Battle of the Aisne. He failed to do so, and the French troops began collective indiscipline in some 50 divisions of the French army. 23 men were shot as ringleaders, although many more were thought to have suffered a similar fate. The French looked up to the USA for support, without which it was possible the French would have sought another path to peace with the Germans. The French needed time to regroup, rethink and recover. It fell on the British to draw the German attention until the USA could mobilise and support the Allies. 3rd Ypres was that diversion. General Haig convinced the War Cabinet a limited offensive would be supported by the French. Despite weakening political resolve in the face of casualty numbers, Haig's plan was put into practice. There were two essential elements: weakening of the German defences at the Messines Ridge, from where the Germans were able to machine gun British lines and harass the main supply route. And the German lines would be torn apart by a series of massive mine explosions underneath the German trenches. The area had been extensively tunnelled by teams shipped in from the coal mining industry in the UK. 19 mines were blown from a total of 26, and the objectives were taken that day. The second phase was to break through the German line at Passchendaele and on to the North Sea beyond. The attack was preceded by a 10-day bombardment of German lines with artillery, and on the 31st of July 1917, 12 divisions and supporting guns went over the top. The attack stalled almost immediately. The German troops had survived the bombardment by hunkering down deep, well-protected bunkers and trenches. As soon as the hail of artillery fire ceased, they repositioned their guns and waited for the unsuspecting British Tommy, who had been told there would be little resistance. Haig pressed on with the plan despite calls to abandon the attack from the commanders on the ground. Wave after wave of British soldiers were killed by machine gun fire as the German hosed the battlefield with bullets and shrapnel. Eventually the ridge and the village of Passchendaele was captured on the 6th of November 1917. 13 weeks after the battle commenced, and the British casualties totalling 300,000. Or put it another way, 35 men lost for every metre of ground. Haig's Chief of Staff, Kegel, visited the scene and is reported to have broken down in tears, saying, "Good God, did we really send men to fight in that?" Opinions of Haig fell into two camps: military genius or a madman out for his own ends. However, whatever his motives, France survived 1917 and the Americans came into the war in support of the Allies. Ypres saw further action when in April 1918 the Germans struck up a counter-offensive in an all-out effort to win the war. The Germans made gains as far as Lys, taking back Messines Ridge and Plug Street Village. Fierce fighting in the southern end of the British sector saw near disaster, and only support from the French and Americans averted absolute dire consequences. The Germans drove a wedge into the Allied lines some 10 miles deep. However, their gain was also their downfall. The wedge called for fighting on 3 vulnerable fronts, and with extended lines of supply meant the Allied forces were able to halt and rebuff the German advance. A change of tactics saw the Germans try a pincer movement to encircle and destroy the tired Allied forces. But the Germans were also tired, and the commander, Ludendorff, had to deal with his political masters. Germany was seeing a series of strikes, disenchantment with the war, and the Germans were beginning to riot at home. Armed rebellion started to raise its head in Germany itself. Ludendorff was exhausted. He had not yet recovered from the loss of his son the previous month, and a hair's breadth from success he called an end to the offensive. American historian Brigadier Marshall said of the battle, "There was no nobler or more decisive stand than that of the BEF in front of Ypres in April 1918. Over the Battle of Ypres, British forces lost around 500,000 men. After one of the battles, Major John McCrae, a Canadian doctor, wrote the poem In Flanders Fields to commemorate a friend whose funeral he had overseen.